Welcome back, folks, for a leak speculation video on the upcoming replacement for the Waffenträger E100. Now, this tank destroyer is one of the hardest vehicles to balance in the game because it has the worst camo rating of all tanks in the game. Absolutely the worst. And it has a giant turret which has no armor on it, only 20mm at the front, 10 at the sides, and 5 at the rear. So whenever this tank gets spotted, which is quite often, it gets shot at and easily penetrated and gets mowed down pretty quickly, so dealing tons of damage to it, and it dies pretty soon. So basically, in order to counterbalance all these terrible weak spots, they put the most accurate 128mm and 150mm with the auto-loading system and the fastest aim time. So basically, you can clip some big heavy tanks from full health to 0 with a cold clip of this tank, and you just pop back into cover to reload. So basically, the playstyle of the Waffenträger E100 leads to a lot of camping, which you just camp behind a building, pop out after your team spots for you, and clip somebody down and pop back into cover. So yeah, heavy camping playstyle. And Wargaming wants to remove this kind of playstyle and replacing the Waffenträger E100 with something more suited to the whole tech line, the Waffenträger glass cannon tech line. So tanks like the Waffenträger Panther 4 and Borsig Waffenträger are glass cannons. They have a single shot cannon, which cannot burst somebody down, but they have good camo rating, so you can just hide in the bush and shoot at people. So that's the main playstyle of the Waffenträgers. Whereas for the E100 version, you can just come out of a building or behind a cover and clip somebody from full health, which is absolutely ridiculous, and just pull back to reload, which is kind of broken, but then again, it's not the best representation of the glass cannon line. So they were thinking about replacing this tank destroyer with the Waffenträger Panther, which I am highly excited about it. So let's talk about the Waffenträger Panther. So basically, a little history about the Waffenträger project. Back during World War II, a lot of the guns, heavy guns, were towed by trucks or other vehicles. Guns like the 88mm L71 were towed by a truck. And if the army are retreating, so to speak, or if they are defeated, the Nazis would destroy their equipment so the Russians or the Americans would not use them against them. So basically, they would take their guns and destroy them, whereas they don't have the trucks to tow them away. So this is kind of expensive because you're destroying your own equipment, which you cannot retrieve. So they thought about putting these guns on cheap, chassis from other tanks or other vehicles like a Jeep or, a truck or something like that. But the gun is kind of big, so they put it on tracks. So basically, that led to the Waffenträger Panther 4, the Waffenträger Borsig designed. So a lot of tanks, or suit-on-suit tanks, so to speak. It's not actual tanks, but just track vehicles with a gun on top. So that's basically the Waffenträger project. And for the replacement of the Waffenträger E100, they want to put the Panther version of the Waffenträger. It carries a multitude of the same guns used as the Panther 4, the 128mm and 150mm, but it's not auto-loading system, so it plays more like the predecessor to the Waffenträger E100. So here are some models of the Waffenträger Panther, and it looks pretty cool in my opinion because it looks like a Panther with steroids or giant muscular gun on top. That's actually amazing. And an interesting note, the GW Panther, the tier 7 artillery for the Germans, is actually a Waffenträger project, which is basically a gun on top of the Panther. So if you happen to see the new GW Panther at tier 10, that's likely a good representation because they're related. So yeah, it is likely the new tier 10 tank destroyer will look like the GW Panther. So I wouldn't be surprised, but it's like having a Lorraine 40T but with a giant gun, or a normal Panther with a giant gun. So that's always fun. And here I have a spreadsheet of what the Waffenträger of Panther will be like when it's introduced into the game. Now every stat is based on the Panther's hull as well as the GW Panther, and some math I did based on weight and stuff. So take everything as speculative, alright? It's not the real thing. This is a speculation video, so don't go shoving it down my throat. So here we go. Now I am recording in 1080p, so increase your screen resolution if you want to read through everything. But hit points wise, it should have about 1900 or so hit points because it's based on the Panther's hull, not the E100. So 1900 hit points would be fair. The Foch 155 has 1850, so 1900 is pretty good. It's supposed to have a 700 horsepower engine, but a 900 horsepower engine was planned, so wonder which. Now the weight of this tank destroyer should be about 40 or so tons depending on the weapon placed, because based on the weapon suggested by Silent Stalker on For the Record, it's a 150mm L64, which should weigh about 9 tons or so. So given the weight of the Panther's hull, which is about 27 tons or so, that would be about 40-ish tons for this tank destroyer. So quite alright. So power to weight ratio with a 700 horsepower would be 17.25, which is pretty good. And a 900 horsepower will give 22.5 power to weight ratio, which is fair. So it still plays like the Waffenträger Panzer IV, which is good in my opinion. Top speed should be about 40-ish to 50-ish kilometers per hour based on the hull as well as the gun. Reverse is 12 to 15 or so. Hull traverse would be a little bit slower in my opinion than the Panther because of the gun. So should be around 30-ish degrees per second of traverse. So when you're playing this tank destroyer, you can play it with a fast mobility, but you cannot play it like a medium tank. So yeah, that actually is a good choice for hull traverse, about 30 degrees per second. Terrain resistance should be the same about the GW Panther, so yeah, that's about 1.15 for hard, 1.3 for medium, and 2.1 for soft, which is pretty good for a quote-unquote medium tank-like tank destroyer, so that's pretty fair. Turret traverse should be pretty slow since it's a big gun, so 18.2 degrees per second, which is fair. If it's a high caliber like 150mm, so 16 degrees per second, which is also fair. View range will be nerfed like the 9.6 tank destroyer nerf, so should be around 380-ish meters of view range, which is fair, average. Alright, and radio will be above 700 meters. Alright, hull armor will be the same as the GW Panther because you don't want to have that much armor on your Waffenträger tank carriers or gun carriers, so to speak. So it should have about 50mm at the front, 30 at the sides, and 20 at the rear. And there should be a gun shield encasement, so basically the gun shield on these tank destroyers. So that should be about 20mm at the front, 20 at the sides, and 10 at the rear. Alright, now this tank destroyer should have two guns. One is 128mm and the other one is 150mm. But which of these versions of these two guns should be placed? Now Silent Stalker suggested a L64 version, which I put right here. So alright, and the original L43 SFH 43 version I put right here, alongside with the Romtel Borsig's 128mm. So this is actually historical, as based on the picture. On this picture, obviously not really historical, but based on the picture, it's this gun. So penetration wise, you can see right here. But let's talk about the 150mm L64 suggested by Silent Stalker on For the Record. So the L64 is a long caliber gun. That means you have to times 64 with 150mm. So basically that's how long this gun is. So after some calculation, this gun is about 9 meters long. Alright, the Panther's hull is about 6.5 meters. So this gun is huge. And if it's using this gun, the L64, that means that the gun will be placed in the rear like the Waffenträger Panzer IV, because the gun is too huge. If you're placing it in the middle of this tank destroyer, the gun would counterbalance the whole weight of the tank. So the center of gravity will be over the gun instead of over the tank. And when you come to a stop, the whole tank flips over. So the whole gun should be rear mounted if it's the L64 version. So penetration wise, you should have about 290 to 300 millimeters of penetration based on the same caliber from stuff like the Object 268 or the Foch 155 or the T110 series. So it should have a high amount of penetration. Damage should be about 750. Rate of fire should be about 3.7 to 4.2-ish because it's a little bit faster than the L, or a little bit slower than the L43 version, which is used on the Waffenträger Panzer IV. So it's a little bit slower to fire. That's, well, it's mostly depend on wargaming staff and their balancing issues, but I would think it has a slower rate of fire than the smaller caliber version. DPM should be about 2,775 to about 3,200 or so. So that's pretty fair, pretty good. And rate of fire alongside with reload time should be about 16 seconds or so, up to 14 seconds or down to 14 seconds. So that's fair. Accuracy should be about 0.33 to 0.37 because it's a big caliber gun and it's on a fixed mounted vehicle like the Panther. So it's not going to be super fast accurate and quick to aim because it's not the GW, no, it's not the Waffenträger auf E100 because it's not a big tank. They don't need to counterbalance everything out. So for balancing issues sake, I would say that it has about 0.33 accuracy with 2.5 second aim time. So that's actually pretty fair in my opinion. Gun depression will be about 5 degrees at the front and 15 degrees of gun elevation because it should be like a big cannon that cannot turn upwards that much. So based on physics and laws of gravity and stuff. So that's why I think about this Waffenträger auf Panther. So I wouldn't think it has a 150mm L64 because the gun is too huge. It's a big gun. Now you're gonna play something with that big of a gun on a small chassis like the Panther. That means that this gun will not have a great gun depression. So you're playing it like the Panzer IV. So it'll be weird because you have to use your ass end for more gun depression because you have to turn the gun around for more gun depression. So that's how you play the Waffenträger Panzer IV as well as playing this tank. So I would rather you have the center mounted gun because you can actually play like a medium tank that way, but it's alright in my opinion. So in my opinion about the Waffenträger Panther when it becomes actually released is that this tank would play like a medium tank with a giant caliber gun. So it would be like a Lorraine 40T but with a giant caliber instead of burst damage. So there will be a hybrid of tank destroyers with medium tanks. So that's what I think this project would be aimed towards. Whereas like tanks like the T30 or the T110E4, that's a hybrid between a heavy tank and a tank destroyer. So yeah, it looks fair in my opinion if you're gonna play the Waffenträger Panther like a medium tank with a giant caliber gun. That doesn't turn as well as medium tanks. So if you increase the hull traverse on this tank destroyer to about 40-ish degrees per second, then this tank will be OP because you can play it like a medium tank and just clip somebody for 750 damage or run away. But if you have a slower hull traverse like 30 degrees per second, it is more mobile to get into sniping positions, but you cannot really play it like a medium tank. So I think it counterbalances like that. So in my opinion, or my views about the Waffenträger auf Panther is that this tank destroyer should play like a hybrid between a medium tank and a tank destroyer with a giant gun. So that would be fun, but I doubt it because that would be too OP. Now, the GW Panther has a gun encasement because it has the side skirts and the gun shield, whatever. So it has a limited degrees of gun traverse because it doesn't turn the gun all the way around. It's not a fully traversable turret, pseudo turret. So hopefully for the Waffenträger auf Panther, it doesn't get the side skirts, which means that it can turn the gun all the way around. But if it doesn't and does get the side skirts, that means that it will have limited turret traverse or gun traverse on this tank destroyer, like the FE215B 183 or the FE4005 Stage 2. So you have a limited gun traverse, which is alright. I mean, it limits more on playing this tank or playing this tank destroyer as a medium, so it limits it a little bit more. But there's no gun depression for this tank destroyer because it's rear mounted. So if you're gonna place it like a fixed gun fighting compartment without a fully traversable turret, you have no gun depression to shoot downwards. So that's kind of rough, but hopefully it has a fully traversable gun turret. That's what I thought. Well, at least that's what I thought about the FE4005 Stage 2. But look how that turned out. So that's my speculation video on the Waffenträger auf Panther or Panzer V. This name is overemphasized. Way too much long names are good. Whatever. So yeah, it's a pretty tank, but hopefully it's center mounted because I wish for center mounted tank like this one. So that actually looks pretty cool in my opinion. This doesn't look as well because it looks like the GW Panther. So meh. And there's not enough tank destroyer or not enough cool looking tank destroyer in my opinion. So yeah, because the tank destroyer I really want is the E100 Crocodile. So I have a picture right here. So 1 second. And here is the tank destroyer that I really want. The E100 Crocodile. It's basically a prettier version of the Panzer E100. It looks like a Lamborghini Gallardo with a giant gun on top. That's amazing. That's so sexy. The Panzer E100 looks like a freaking iron that you use to smooth out shirts, you know. Blah. So yeah, I can hope all I want, but they're not gonna put this tank destroyer into the game. It's so big too. It's even bigger than the T95. That's pretty crazy. But thank you guys for watching my speculation video on the Waffenträger auf Panther. Now, based on the gun design, it will likely look like the the GW Panther. So yeah, it looked like this. So which is kind of okay-ish in my opinion, but it certainly doesn't look as nice as this version with the center mounted pseudo turret. So hopefully they go with this design, hopefully, but I doubt it. So meh. Alright, but ew, that's a god awful looking gun shield. Yeah, and here's the GW Panther. But thank you guys for watching my speculation video on the replacement for the Waffenträger auf E100. Now leave a comment below on what you think about the Waffenträger E100 switch to the Waffenträger Panther. Jeez, I say Waffenträger like 10 billion times this video. But as always, rate this video if you can. That always helps me out a lot. Subscribe to my channel for more World of Tanks stuff. And thank you guys for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.